Okay, bright good morning to you and welcome to Plants, Pests, and Pathogens. This webinar is sponsored by the Department of Entomology, Department of Plant Pathology, the Plant Disease and Insect Clinic, and Horticulture Sciences Department. And we're delighted that you're here. We got a great lineup this morning. I would ask if you haven't already done your setup on your audio, please do that now so that if you have questions you want to ask that we'll be able to hear you. Quick reminder, everything that you type into the chat box will be able to be seen by the moderators. So there is no such thing as privacy on Illuminate. We've been having a little bit of an issue with echoing on the microphone this morning. I think if everybody leaves their microphone turned off except when you're actually talking, that'll cut down on that. We are recording this session. It'll be available on the website, and you can download it later to watch it again or to show to other folks. In the chat box, I put the website address for the Plants, Pests, and Pathogens website, so the recordings will be linked from that site. Extension agents, if you haven't already registered for the training on the LMS system, please do that so we can make sure that you get credit. My name is Lucy Bradley. I'm the Urban Horticulture Specialist here at NC State and the moderator this morning. And we're going to take off and go. This is the front page to the website, and you can get to programs from previous years by clicking on the schedules. You can get to information about Illuminate and how to run the program by clicking. There's lots of information over here on the left that'll take you to either about upcoming programs or previous programs or how to get through the session easily. This is today's lineup. We are going to start off with Agent Insights by Mike and Al and Eric, and then Steve Bambara is going to be going through famous insects, and we'll have current issues in disease and entomology by Mike and Dave. Lee J. Hicks is our incredible technology specialist, and if you have any questions or need help with any kind of program issues, please contact Lee J. And actually, before I turn it over to Mike, Lee J, do you have any tips or anything you want to share with the group?
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I'm Lee J. The only thing that I want to tell you about is under the participant window, there's a list of a whole bunch of names. There are smiley faces and clapping and hands that you can raise. Feel free to use that at any time. I'll be monitoring the chat window, and if you have any questions, we can talk through that. If you have to step away, click on the door icon with the arrow pointing out. That just lets us know that you're not there. And if we ask you a question, you can click on the green check. Yep, I've seen someone already do that. Click on the check if you can hear me. All right, good job. Those that check and X might turn to A, B, C, or D if the presenters have questions for you. So you can use that to interact with us. Again, if you have any questions, you can come through the chat or you can send me an email. All right, turn it back over to Lucy.
Thanks, Lee J. We've got an updated version of Illuminate Live, and one of the things that it does for us is it will keep track of the participants, and we can use that as a registration thing. So in order to take advantage of that and not have to do that separately, if when you log in you would give your complete name and your county if you're an individual, so you give your first name, your last name, and then the county that you're in. And if you're logging in for a county and there's a whole bunch of people there with you, if you would log in with the county name and then include in parentheses the number of participants that are there. That way we won't have to do that as a separate thing. That'll save a lot of time and energy on the county agent's part trying to track all that down. So thanks for that. Okay. First up, we have Mike Wilder. Mike's an extension agent in Nash County. Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. Hello, everybody. I'm Mike Wilder. Consumer and, urban and commercial horticulture agent in Nash County. I'll be just giving a brief update on what's going on in Nash County with Master Gardeners and urban horticulture. We've been around since the fall of 2000. We currently have 34 active volunteers with an additional 16 students currently in training. And without support from the Nash County Master Gardener Volunteer Association, urban horticulture education simply would not exist in Nash County. Our county consists of urban and rural populations, the county with 94,000 folks, and we have about half of Rocky Mount. Total population of Rocky Mount is 58,000, but Nash and Edgecombe counties share the city of Rocky Mount. What are we? Just like you guys, we're teachers of urban horticulture to young people, to seniors, and everyone in between. We're students. We're always looking for more information. We're always eager to learn more. We have a variety of additional educational opportunities after Master Gardeners have completed their initial training. We're also supporters. We have Master Gardeners on advisory committees with the county, our Ag Advisory Committee. We also support the program through fundraising. Very, very little tax dollars go to the urban horticulture program in Nash County. The Master Gardener Association raises money for two reasons: for operating expenses of the association and supporting educational programs, and the second reason is to support the Nash County Arboretum. We also began work on the Arboretum in the year 2000. I think it may have been 2001. Recent accomplishments locally, right here in the Arboretum, we just completed constructing a rain garden, and we have ongoing research in that rain garden thanks to the biological and agricultural education, biological and agricultural engineering department at NC State. One of our graduate students here plans to continue soil sampling and monitoring this rain garden over the next 5 years to document changes in the soil structure and in chemical and other properties. We have also just recently, this past year, completed a stream bed restoration. The photo on the left shows our cooperators, the Natural Resources Conservation Service representatives, as they begin plans and engineering to convert the washed out gully behind them into a restored stream bed, which you see on the right. That project was just completed, and it was a great success thanks to NRCS, the Division of Water Quality, the EPA, and Nash County government. And by the way, Nash County government didn't have to spend a dime here either. Master Gardeners and Cooperative Extension had the idea, offered some guidance, cooperation here in the Arboretum, and now we have a fully restored stream bed on site. Our first effort at a community garden was this past year. The Happy Hill Community Garden was built and grown on Gay Street in Rocky Mount, a disadvantaged section of the city. It was the brainchild of the man you see on the left, L.W. Farmer, one of our Master Gardeners. He rented 24 plots and provided an area for 24 families to grow their vegetables, flowers, or whatever they wanted. And lots of folks were fed. It was a great success, and we plan to continue it into next year. A couple of other things just around the corner. We're about to complete, well, we're about to have these name tags built and or put together. They're solid stainless steel. Right now the Arboretum has no plant ID, but hopefully by the summer, each of the 600 or so plants will have identification tags like this. Our Going Green series is still continuing into the summer with the topics listed on the right. So feel free to come to Nash County on any of these dates and join in. One thing that we're most excited about here in the Arboretum is establishment of the homestead. It's a new section which will interpret late, well actually 17th, 18th, and 19th century life in rural Nash County. We're not talking about the plantation owners and the big white houses. We're talking about the folks who worked hard on these farms. And we are going to have an example of what a typical 17th, 18th, and 19th century homestead may have looked like. It will include this authentic log cabin that was built in the 1800s. We're going to have that moved on site. It was donated by a local citizen. And we'll also reconstruct tobacco barns, have a vegetable garden, orchards, even a well, and the old outhouse. So when that's complete, we'll be very happy to have you here to take a look. And that's about what is going on in Nash County. Lots and lots of other things, but just a few of the things we're pretty happy about right now. If you like, we could talk about logos. Maybe not. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Next up is Al Cook, the horticulture agent in Chatham County.
Good morning. Thank you, Lucy. Good to be with you this morning. I guess in Chatham County, all the talk lately has just been weather, the nature of the winter. We have not had the brief warming spells that we are normally accustomed to. You know, normally during the winter time it gets cold, but then we'll have days when it's in the 50s or 60s, and then it'll get cold again and it'll warm up again. And we haven't had those brief warming periods this year, so a lot of our plant blooming and planting activities have been somewhat delayed. The winged elms are just now blooming, something we normally expect to see in late January to February. The Prunus mume is still blooming. I have a Professor Sargent camellia at home that's raging with its bright red double flowers. Unfortunately, it still gets down below freezing at night, so they're frequently damaged. But I enjoy it nevertheless. I want to mention a plant that people here in Chatham are real excited about. In fact, it was recently featured as a showstopper plant at the Southern Spring Show in Charlotte. We're excited about it locally because it's a hybrid cross created by one of our local nurserymen, Philip Dark at Oakmont Nursery, and the plant is Crown Jewel Gardenia. It's a cross Philip made about 12 years ago between Climbs Hardy and Chuck Hayes gardenias, and it has the double bloom and cold hardiness of Chuck Hayes. It has the heavy bloom set of Climbs Hardy. Dwarf spreading habitat. It's going to top out at about 3 feet, about 3 feet wide, fragrant double blooms. And if I've caught your attention with that, then I'm going to send you the website for it. You can go look at some pictures and see if that's something you'll be interested in. It's a patented plant that is becoming available at from a number of nurseries. So Crown Jewel Gardenia is one we're excited about locally. Moving on into planting things, another issue that a lot of gardeners have had to deal with is it's simply too wet to plow. We'd like to be planting spinach and peas, and in fact, I have planted both of those in my garden within the past couple of weeks. Well, it's just a little over 2 weeks ago, and they're not up yet, which is another issue that we're having to deal with. The soil's not warming up real rapidly. And a number of gardeners are having issues with their soil just too wet. One of the things I encourage gardeners to do is, if you have the opportunity in the fall, get out there and prepare your soil then. And fortunately, I had the time to do that last fall. My beds were ready, so it was simply a matter of opening up little furrows and planting the spinach and peas. But again, they're not up yet. I talked to a commercial grower who planted peas on February 1. And it was 4 weeks before they just began to show their heads. So everything is a little bit delayed here this year. One thing that I am encouraging gardeners to do is participate this year in Plant a Row for the Hungry. It's a curious thing to me that in North Carolina we have both a major obesity issue as well as hunger issues. North Carolina recently was ranked second worst in the nation for food insecurity among children under 5 years of age. And in North Carolina, 24% of those children under 5 lack regular access to good, nutritious food. So we're encouraging gardeners to plant extra, to donate excess through their local food pantries. With little advanced preparation last year, I just encouraged gardeners to start taking excess, because every summer I see gardeners with excess plant produce, exchanging it with each other. So I'd encourage them to take it to food pantries. And in less than 2 weeks, 100 pounds of fresh produce showed up at one of our local food pantries. So we're hoping to do even better than that this year. It's about time to be planting grapes and berries locally, if that's something that gardeners are planning to do. The blueberries, blackberries, grapes can all be planted later this month. We're still pruning. Most of these things have not broken dormancy yet, so it's still plenty of time. In fact, March is a good time for pruning in this part of the world. We're dealing with weeds. The cool season weeds, regardless of what I've said about the wintertime, they have done quite well. So they will be continuing to show up in the next couple of months, I'm sure, several weeks. It's time for those that use herbicides to put out pre-emergence herbicides. Again, normally we would have done that earlier this year, but the soil has remained cool, so it's not too late to do that. I'm going to be interested to hear from Dave and Steve as what they think the weather this year has done for cool season mites. Normally this time of year I'd be warning people to watch for cool season mites on things like Japanese hollies and the junipers. I don't know, given the combination of cool, wet, and snow, in fact, in some cases, how significant an impact that will be. So I'm going to be interested in hearing from you guys about how you see that. One more thing I want to do is forward you one more website. This is one that I created last year simply because gardeners tend to forget what I need to do when. So it's a website I've created for the central part of the state, primarily for Chatham County, for what people need to be thinking about this month. And with that, I'm going to sign off, Lucy.
Thank you, Ted. Thanks for sharing those useful tools. Next up is Eric Caldwell. He's County Extension Director and also handles horticulture in Transylvania County.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome and greetings from Brevard, the home of the white squirrel. For those of you who know me, you know that is not my picture, although I told Lucy that I do tend to scurry around a lot aimlessly and will work for nuts. But anyway, we do. Good to come to you from the beautiful mountains. A little bit about our program here. We've been had a Master Gardener program since the early 90s. Right now we've got about 80 active members, and we've got our biggest class yet. We've got 23 in our current class, and they are all on fire. Honestly, I thought we would lose a few after the first couple sessions, but they're hanging in there and going strong. Real active group. As you can see, I'm a county extension director. I do natural resources, consumer horticulture, a lot of other stuff. My technical training is in animal science. So what that means is I ride a lot of coattails. And one of the fortunate things about being in a place like Brevard is we get a lot of very knowledgeable retirees who I can draw in. And in fact, our training program now is composed. I teach a few of the classes. Cliff Ruth, our commercial hort agent, teaches some, but then we have a lot of our master gardeners and other experts in the community, including Dick Burr, who I know all of y'all remember, retired extension specialist. And in fact, right now I'm here by myself because Dick Burr is doing a propagation class in the other room this morning. So we're pleased to have him there. Some of the things going on in the Western North Carolina, I guess number one, we got the message about 8:15 this morning that we have a new district director. So we welcome Dr. Dan Smith, who also, I believe, coordinates a Master Gardener program in McDowell County, is going to be our new West District Director. So we're pleased to have him on board and looking forward to working with him. Other things going on, we just finished this past week, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, a square foot gardening kind of the trainer session, and we actually had Mel Bartholomew, the author of the Square Foot Gardening book, come and teach folks how to teach the square foot gardening method. And we had 30 participants. They were from all over the United States, Pennsylvania, Alabama, Georgia, and even one from Ontario, Canada. So we're billing this. It was an international conference, and was very pleased to have Lucy come up and join us and with that workshop. And then she went over, as many folks also attended the organic growing school over in Asheville this weekend, which just grows and gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's been real big. Echoing some of the things Al was talking about, we are dealing with issues with the weather. On top of the colder temperatures, the wetter temperatures, we had an abnormal amount of snow and ice as well. A lot of damage in the higher elevations, ice damage, and then I know at my house I've had snow on the ground, at least piles here and there, since before Christmas. So I chatted with Dick Burr a little bit this morning, what's that going to mean? And he just kind of raised his hands and said, well, wait a few weeks and we'll see. So echo a lot of the things that Al was talking about with kind of wait and see with the moisture and the temperatures and all what that's going to do with our plants. Other than that, we are very involved with the local food production, a lot of community gardens, a lot of faith-based gardens going in, following along with what Al was talking about with planting a row for the hungry. We've got several churches in the community that are planting entire gardens for the hungry. Other folks, just community gardens and traditional gardenings, some CSAs popping up. So that whole movement is just growing, and we're real pleased to be a part of working with that. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Lucy, and thanks for having me this morning.
Great, thanks, Eric. Well, keeping with Oscar season, Steve Bambara is rolling out the red carpet for some of the most famous insects around. Steve, let me turn it over to you. Steve, you don't have your microphone on.
Okay, good morning, everybody. It's nice to see all those smiling faces out there, although I believe somebody in Buncombe County is not smiling. But we'll go on. So, today we're going to talk about famous insects, but not just famous insects. Where are they now? And we're going to try to bring you up to date with some of the things that we've been dealing with and you've heard about for so much of this time, and probably are wondering yourself or get questions about what's happening with these things at this particular point. So we'll try to bring you up to date with all this. And the first one to mention is the gypsy moth. And gypsy moth is really a beautiful little moth here. You can see the many colors of it, and the identifying characteristics of this are these little blue dots followed by the red dots in the latter sections. So it's easy to distinguish it from like 10 caterpillars and so on. Maybe you get a lot of northerners move down there and they call in, they say they have gypsy moths, but in reality you can just take a look at it and see that they do not. One of the characteristic parts here too is the adult females lay these, I don't know, sort of semi-crunchy type egg masses on trees, but they lay them on really everything in the world. And if it's near a tree or it's a parked car or a trailer or whatever the deal is, they'll lay these egg masses on those objects, and consequently the Yankees will get in their RVs and drive down here to North Carolina and move them around, not just to North Carolina but everywhere. And so we have consequently moved gypsy moth a lot faster than it would have on its own. The thing that makes it so important is this lower picture on the left, is this defoliation. They can move into an area and just totally strip everything. They're not that partial to pine trees or maybe even poplar trees, but lots of the hardwoods, especially the oaks and things, they will just strip those out. It's more common too that when they are moving into an area, almost like a wave, that you see this terrible denuding of the forests. And the government has spent gazillions of dollars on this and has brought in lots of beneficial parasitoids and predators, etc., with slight benefit. So I think that, in kind of giving my own opinion, yes, it's been pretty bad, but in actuality, I think we're starting to adjust to it a little bit. This was brought in, gypsy moths were brought into the U.S. by a man in 1868 who wanted to, I guess, compete with the silkworm industry. And maybe that wasn't working out, and he opened the window and let the moths out, and the rest is kind of history. And you've heard that story in other situations, and we'll probably hear it again. So it has started to spread more in the northern areas, and you can see down here along the North Carolina line, it just stopped. And I don't know if that had anything to do with the lottery or system or not. They didn't like it, but really, just kidding here. North Carolina is still trying to fend off the gypsy moth invasion. And there's some validity to it. Usually it's a lost cause, but there's some validity to it. This may be on the fringe of the extended area, so perhaps it can be a little bit successful. At any rate, it has been successful to some degree, because in North Carolina there's been this trapping survey since 1982, and they have turned up, and these are the traps down here in the green, and they have intervened with some infestations 100 times is the last figure that we've seen. And in fact, we have had them. Some years ago we had an infestation in Raleigh, and the Department of Agriculture came out and did a spray program and eradicated that little infestation in a small neighborhood. So they're constantly on the vigil for this. We do find moths more along the coastal areas and because of the wind currents, probably directions. And you can see here that basically in Currituck and part of Dare County, there now exists a quarantine area, meaning that they are found there on some regular basis, and that anything moving out of that area needs to be inspected. So we're going to be watching this, and hopefully it won't be too bad in the future. So just on the tail end of that, there is another related species, the Asian gypsy moth, that has been found in a few little pockets out west in those brown squares or brown dots. Very similar habit, etc. We don't have the Asian gypsy moth in the East Coast, although I think that, if I remember correctly, there was a find down in Southport that probably came in on some materials that were being unloaded, and that was quickly taken care of, and so it hasn't shown up again. So all this is done with pheromone trapping and detection for the either of these gypsy moths. Then Mothra, I don't really know where that stands at this point. I think there's going to be a sequel with Mothra and Barney following up on that, but we'll have to wait. Killer bees, as known, these were first introduced into Brazil about 1956 or 57. Again, this was one of those things that was intentionally introduced. They're trying to produce a more effective bee for particularly those semi-tropical areas. And this particular bee from Africa was thought to be able to do that. Some of the swarms escaped, and it has started to move north, particularly around, say, 300 miles a year. So I want to ask you a question about this. And this is our first active thing, and we're going to give you A, B, C, D. Lee J has put that up there if you can vote on their little quiz. And that is, Africanized bees are blank. A, larger than common honeybees. B, more aggressive than common honeybees. C, more frequent swarmers. Or D, more poisonous than common bees. So I'll give you a second on that. Punch those things in. I see. Ooh, look at this. Oh, okay. Wow. Okay. Oh, I like this. All right. I guess that's enough. the answer is, yeah, okay, this is our results here. And the answer is actually C. We had 2 or 3 people who were, all right, Eric is clapping for himself, I think, here, because he got that right. The bees themselves are not larger than the normal honeybees that we have. In fact, they may even be a tiny bit smaller. It'd be hard to see even with the eye, though. And this was a little bit of a trick. They are not more aggressive than honeybees. They are more defensive than honeybees, than the common honeybee. And the distinction there is that bees are not out there going around deciding trying to attack somebody just because they got nothing better to do or they don't like what you're wearing. But the defensive response is magnified 50 or 100 times. So if you disturb one of these Africanized colonies, instead of being attacked by 30 or 50 bees and being chased for 100 yards, you may be attacked by a few thousand and then chased for a quarter or a half of a mile. So the sting risk is much greater with those because of their defensive response. And going down to B, they are not any more poisonous than the common honeybees, basically the same amount of venom and potency there. So the answer here, a little tricky, was more frequent swarmers. They are a tropical bee, and rather than try to store up a bunch of honey, etc., to get through the winter, they are producing bees. They put their effort into producing bees, so they throw out swarms. And swarming is the reproductive method for honeybee colonies because they're social insects. So this is another thing that has added to their quick movement up north toward us, or toward the U.S. from Brazil, throwing out all these swarms over and over again. So very good. And where are they now? Okay, in 1990 they reached Texas, and suddenly their dispersal rate slowed down dramatically. And they did not take over the whole U.S. You would think that they would have by now otherwise, but for reasons we don't totally understand, but I would just sort of suggest that it had to do something with the fact that it is more of a tropical bee, and now we're starting to get into the more temperate regions, that this whole thing has slowed down, and maybe a little bit more hybridization, not quite sure on that. So the lower tier along the Rio Grande, they have been able to spread in that direction. And this must be, in Florida, it must be a separate introduction there somehow, or most likely is at any rate. So we don't have them in North Carolina at this time. We have had perhaps 2 introductions, artificial introductions off of cargo. That at least one came off cargo, and those were eradicated. They really weren't very healthy at the time. They were in a bunch of pipes, etc., and those are eradicated. So we don't have them at this time. Will we get them? Maybe we will to some degree. If we look down here, this is a habitat suitability map. And again, these are just guesses based on really habitat that they could survive in, and also maybe throw in a little bit of rainfall and temperature as to whether they could make it here. So I guess there's some potential here, especially more along the east coast areas of our state. Japanese beetles. Everywhere I've always lived my whole life, there's been Japanese beetles. So to me, this isn't anything surprising. And what's more interesting is learning about some of these other states that are now getting them and how they're reacting to them. It's just horrible for them, which I can't understand. So they were introduced into New Jersey, or at least they were first identified in New Jersey in a nursery in 1916 or so. And it took them a little while to spread, just slowly out, as you can see. And it really wasn't until somewhere around, after 1950 or 1998 that they really began to move on out. And what's interesting too is you see these little yellow pockets. These are clearly transported there by nursery, or at least by people have moved these out to these little pockets. And so it is a bit of a problem now for other states, and especially in nursery and landscape, So there is, in fact, the USDA now has some regulations on moving materials and monitoring for them, etc. So for us, we kind of take it for granted and just have lived with it, but now this is invading a lot of other places across the country, and they're taking it pretty seriously. There's the German beetle. I don't know where that is right now, so we're going to move on from that. Then there's the Asian ambrosia beetle, and this was first introduced into South Carolina in 1974. It's a tiny little beetle. I'll show you a picture of it in just a second. And it will bore into trees and nursery stock, usually in the 1-inch to 3-inch diameter type trees. So we don't really find it much, or at least certainly not a problem in anything larger than that. And since being moved into South Carolina, probably partly because of man's movement, it has been spreading over a large area. And typically what happens is between that beetle and the fungus that it grows will start to clog the pores and canals of the trees and cause them to wilt. Here particularly when it happens is sometime after leafing out or in the spring, etc. The foliage starts to wilt and kind of shrivel off. And so that'd be a little bit suspicious. Plus, if you see any of these, what is generally referred to as toothpicks on the trunks and the stems, that's another indication that at least there is, it may not be the Asian ambrosia beetle, but at least it's one of these ambrosia beetles. So it was very clever. There didn't seem any way to eliminate or eradicate this beetle once it got in. So instead of doing that, what they did was just change the name from Asian to Granulate ambrosia beetle. So now we don't have any Asian ambrosia beetle problems in North Carolina anymore. However, with the Granulate ambrosia beetle, again, it's still this beetle plus fungus equals disease. We don't have a disease that we have named as such with this beetle, but there is this fungus there. It just hasn't received a name. And the reason they changed the name to Granulate ambrosia beetle is because of this area right back here. It's called the declivity, but this rear end of this particular little beetle, it's only 3 or 4 millimeters long. Well, maybe it's 5 or 6 millimeters long, but it looks very dull and has this like granulate texture to it. And so the good part about this is you don't have to really know all the beetle taxonomy, etc. Because as far as I know, in North Carolina anyway, this is the only beetle that has that really dull texture to it. And with a little bit of even hand lens, you'd be able to detect that. So that's the identification sign of that. For the good part of this, I guess, is that it's not always fatal if the infestation is fairly low, and many times the plants will outgrow this. I've seen some really seemingly heavily infested trees that in 2 or 3 years, though they didn't die, and 2 or 3 years later they seem to recover to some degree. So that's good. We have no treatments for these beetles once they get into the trunk. There's no systemics, etc. And part of the reason for that is that they just bore a straight little tunnel toward the center of the tree, and they will grow a fungus in there and feed on the fungus. So they're not really eating the wood once they are in there. Consequently, if you can put some poison systemic in the tree, if they're not eating it, they're not going to get it. So that's what they're living on. The difficult or the most impacted situations with the Granulate ambrosia beetle are fruit trees, which have nice, smooth, soft bark and soft wood to some degree. Also, you get production off of those trees with your fruit. So that's been a problem for a lot of the fruit growers. And in nursery industry, some of the worst plants too that we've seen are some of the Japanese red maples, some of the ornamental cherries, etc. So we have had a few nursery growers who have stopped growing things like Kwanzan cherries just because it was too much to deal with as a nursery plant. The treatment is basically protective bark sprays in the spring or when the beetles are out to discourage them from boring in the first place. And two, if you have a tree that is really heavily infested and declining, then at some point later on you can leave it there almost as a trap tree, because if you have any beetles infested in one tree, then they all seem to be attracted to that same tree. So you leave it there for a few more weeks and then yank it and destroy it. Now, one of its cousins is the red Bay Ambrosia beetle. And as you can figure out, this little beetle, same sort of a thing, fungus plus beetle, creates a problem. And this has a name, the disease here has a name called laurel wilt disease. And this is laurel. You have laurel or red bay, same plant, two common names. And this is basically an understory tree that is very coastal, up from Florida all the way into maybe southern Virginia. And it's a very important maritime tree. You can see it was first detected in 2002 in, I'm forgetting if this was Savannah or where, I don't know where it says, Port Wentworth, Georgia. And then 2 or 3 years later there was another probable introduction at this other point. So it's beginning to spread up and down. It's into South Carolina. It's not yet noticed in North Carolina, which the border is right there. And look at the map down here that shows the historic range of red bay. So there is a lot of host material that is out there available for this insect to attack. The other terrible part of this is, at this point, we think that it's also the same beetle that is attacking avocados. And avocado is not just some understory tree, it is a big industry in Florida. So they have launched a big campaign to save the guac and to be monitoring and watching out for avocados. People in Florida have avocado trees in their backyard like we have blueberry bushes or blackberries or something like that. So it's not just the major growers that can have trees that are infested. So again, you see these little toothpicks on some of these trees, larger trees, and see what they can do here to the understory. And this is Jekyll Island. This picture on the left is Jekyll Island in Georgia, and this is a laurel tree. This was the largest known laurel or red bay tree around. This is Horton Plantation, which was built in the early or mid 1700s, and unfortunately it had to be cut down. So you can tell that here on Jekyll Island, this tree can no longer hide the building. Okay, sad thing. The next critter that we want to mention is the emerald ash borer. You've all heard of this, and it's something that's going to be knocking on our door, or I guess it is knocking on our door. This is a little metallic wood-boring beetle, and it's flathead borer, very attractive. And I guess two things with the flathead borers in general is up here on the right part of your screen. It makes these D-shaped exit holes. So if you see D-shaped exit holes, you know it's a flathead borer that has come out of that tree. Now, it's not necessarily the emerald ash borer, but all those groups, those metallic wood-boring beetles, will do that. The range down in the lower right, it was found in Fairfax, Virginia, and maybe a little bit farther south than that. So we are kind of on our way. It was originally detected in Detroit, Michigan in 2002, and that seems like a long way to go in 8 years, and in fact they've had a little bit of help. This is some trees on the left here that have been cut down and the bark is off of them. So you can see that this, unlike those ambrosia beetles, this beetle feeds underneath the bark and in the cambial layer in there, and is basically doing some girdling of the tree, etc. So it's having quite a big impact. All right, the Asian longhorn beetle is a pretty insect, and again, this is one of the cerambycids or longhorn beetles. This is the male here that you're seeing. It was discovered in two places in the U.S. One was, I think it was Brooklyn, but in New York City, and the other was Chicago. Both areas launched massive campaigns to eradicate it. The Chicago area has done quite a good job. The New York area, not so good, and that may be partly to do with more of the politics and how this whole thing has to be handled. So we've got these pockets in the country that have this Asian longhorn beetle. The suspicion is that many of these things, but particularly the Asian longhorn beetle, came to us in things like solid wood packing material such as pallets, wooden pallets, etc. Now the USDA has lots of regulations in place for inspecting and treating these pallets and making sure maybe some of them even aren't wood anymore, if you've noticed that. And we're trying to reduce that because many pests have been introduced on this solid wood packing material. So what's at risk for the Asian longhorn beetle? This is a U.S. Forest Service map. However, I've got my doubts about how good this is for you to consider, because the trees down here that it says are susceptible, which is true, are maple, beech, and birch, and elms and ashes that are dotted here in the red, but we have all those trees here, and so I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be as susceptible as a lot of the other countries. So we'll kind of see what happens along that line, so we'll have to keep our eyes out for that. This was a town in Connecticut that had Asian longhorn beetles in it, and once the trees are infested, there's very little that, again, with this critter either, that can be done regarding it. So the tactic was anything that was infested was removed, and so the tree crew came in here on this little street and took out the trees. So it's kind of like reminiscent of chestnut and Dutch elm, etc. So there is that impact is there for a lot of areas. Walnut twig beetle, we don't have this, and it has only been detected in a couple of states, those yellow places up there, and certainly not across the entire region. Just those are the states and the spots in California that this has been detected. And again, it's one of those fungus plus beetle equals 1,000 cankers disease. We have walnut trees in North Carolina, so we'll have to see what happens. Here's the second little quiz of the morning that I have for you, and that is a serious means for spreading wood-boring beetle pests is A. Movement of firewood, B. Hitchhiking on travel trailers and RVs, C. The nursery industry, or D. The Oprah Winfrey Show. So mark your little thing and see what you think is one of the major ways that the wood-boring beetles are spread. All right, we have some good answers. Lee J, want to put those up? Okay, very good. Well, nobody said. Oh, somebody said D. Who is that? I don't know. All right. Well, the answer is movement of firewood. Absolutely. A lot of these boring beetles are being transferred through firewood. And at first, when I heard that, I thought, well, gosh, why is there firewood being moved all over the place? But in fact, there are lots of places, especially when trees die, they cut the wood up and they may sell it. And here, I know we see firewood at the food line out in the front near the doors, stacked up. Where's that coming from? I have no earthly idea where that's coming from. So firewood should not be moved any more than, I would say, at the most 50 miles away from any location. Also, when you go camping, or not maybe you, but when people go camping, they may throw a load of firewood into the back of the truck or the trailer or whatever and take it off to the campsite somewhere else, and etc. The hitchhiking on the travel trailers and the RVs is, in fact, a method that a lot of us do that moves insects, but it's not so much for the boring beetles. It may be more for the gypsy moths and the marmorated stink bugs that we'll talk about here in just a second. Nursery industry also does move a little bit, and Oprah Winfrey, I don't know what she does, but the main one is the movement of firewood, so very good. Yay! Where are those beetles now? I don't know. We got one or two more to cover, and that's the Sirex wood wasp. But we've had all these hardwood beetles that are doing all this damage and threatening our forests. But now we have a wood wasp, a wasp that bores and larvae tunnel in through the wood. But this one attacks living pines. So the pines are not going to escape all these other things that we have been mentioning, these introduced and famous pests. So, okay, the Sirex wood wasp was first detected in somewhere, I don't know if it was 2006 or not, is what this was saying, but not too many years ago, somewhere in upstate New York. And it has spread along this area slowly and is moving out. Again, wouldn't want to transport firewood here because of this also. So the potential is, or at least let's put it this way, his favorite pest, or favorite host, excuse me, is pine. And it loves loblolly pine. Do we grow any loblolly pine in North Carolina? Heck yeah. The place is full of it. So this is a potential. Now, New York and I think USDA are doing a lot, monitoring this, etc. I don't know what's going to come of it or what they'll be able to do to totally stop it, but at least if man will quit moving things around for the insects, that would be a great help. The Hemlock Woolly Adelgid in our western counties, and I say western counties, but it is moving across the state as far as hemlock is grown. We have, this is a little bit of, an adelgid is like an aphid, like a woolly aphid basically, and it attacks the branches and the twigs and sucks the sap out of it, and within a few years can cause needle and branch and tree death thereafter. This was first introduced somewhere in Virginia in 1951, and oddly it seemed to spread more north than it did to the south, but nonetheless it has moved up and down the Appalachians, particularly where all those hemlock trees are grown. And I would say that if you see here, this is Wake County. We had a find in Wake County this year, and it was just on a tree or two that was in a landscape, and so that's being taken care of. But again, there are a certain number of, I didn't do that. There are a certain number of insects, excuse me, there are a certain number of hemlocks throughout the landscape, at least as far east as Wake County. So the control for this is we have some foliar sprays. Those of you who are involved in it, there's some soil injection of some chemicals, some trunk injection, even bark sprays. We have the tools. It's just too big. We can certainly take care of an individual tree, and that's good, but the whole forest is another issue. USDA is releasing some beetles, but that is having minor effect. And there's also looking at the species that are susceptible. The Suga canadensis, which is the one that we all have primarily, is highly susceptible, but the chinensis, from which it came from, is much less susceptible. So we're trying to do some breeding. Two more things here, I think.
There's a question in the chat box about what are pine beetles?
Oh, what are pine beetles? I'll probably ask Dave to help in on this, but it is a related beetle, and it also introduces a fungus. These, as far as I know, are native beetles. Help me if I'm wrong, Dave, on that. And they sporadically will cause the death of pines in, I want to say, sort of localized areas. And that localized area could be 1 acre or could be 50 acres. So we have these outbreaks. And yes, those will kill pines, but it's not quite the same setting or, I don't know, danger, if I should choose that word, that we see to some of these other things. So yes, and we have spent bazillions of dollars on southern pine beetle. I'm not trying to preach here, but where has it gotten us? I don't know. So we can ask, well, Dave will talk to us about that in a second if we want. If I didn't answer that. So the fire ant quarantine in North Carolina has just been extended again. So this red area is moving out a little bit. The thing to remember is this quarantine area is not the actual range of where the fire ants are. The fire ants really are generally beyond that area. This is a regulatory area, so it tends to fall a little bit behind the actual movement or the front of the fire ants. So the fire ants are found in more areas than what you see here. But the regulation, the quarantine, means that plant material and hay and large land moving equipment that leaves this area is supposed to be inspected or treated prior to movement out of the quarantine area. So where are the fire ants? They are across the southern states for sure, and moving into, there's some in California, as a matter of fact. This map up here at the top, primarily the red, this is the, I guess, the potential area, red moving up to light blue. I don't know if maybe someday we'll ever get a little bit of fire ant up into those other regions, but certainly in the red areas, those are potential places that if they're not there already, they will be. So this is a specific North Carolina potential. This is University of Arkansas did this map, potential for red imported fire ant range expansion, and pulling out the North Carolina state, you see these red dots really are the certain, what they say is certain for fire ant survival. I don't think we're going to see it. You're not going to see it in some of your more northern counties as bad as you are going to be seeing it down here in the southern counties, but it will still be there and perhaps something to be concerned with or deal with. And quickly with fire ant management, there are 100 products that are out there. Some are baits, some are drenches, some you broadcast all over the place, some you can only use on the mounds, some are insect growth regulators, some are basically outright poisons. And the failure of success with a lot of these treatments is people not reading the label and ignoring the important factors. The calendar, the time of year, or whenever it is put out is important. The time of day can even be a factor, especially with baits. The temperature of the day can also be very important. Rainfall, if it's wet already, if it's going to rain, all these things are factors that you have to take into consideration if you're going to treat for fire ants and be successful about it. So
there's a question whether the cold winter will help.
Is that from, who is that from? Okay, well, we get this question a lot, and I'm going to have to say that the cold weather will help to some degree in that it's going to shorten the life cycle. In other words, here it's still middle of March and we've had lots of cold weather. If winter was over in the middle of February, that would have been a month earlier that they could have gotten going. We don't have super cold temperatures for long periods of time that will actually kill the fire ants, but I have to believe that just the cooler general temperature is going to slow or reduce the amount of time that they can be active. So in Caldwell County or Buncombe County, they're not going to be, I don't think, as much problem as they're going to be in Columbus County, for example. So we'll also see. I do think that it's going to slow down what we normally would have seen compared to like last year. Again, there's a sort of a synopsis. There's so much information on fire ants out there that it was mind-boggling. And so I made up a new insect note last year on fire ants in your yard, and this kind of boils it down to one little sheet, because you get a call from somebody who's got fire ants. They don't want you to give them 100 products and all these things, etc. They just really want to know what to do, or what can they do right then and there. And this would answer that kind of a client question. Oh, I'm missing sorry, we lost that. The Fayetteville fire ants are now, we're third place in the standings. That's a ice hockey team. So in case you were interested in what they were doing at this time. Last insect here is the brown marmorated stink bug. This looks like a brown stink bug like we have here, several other species. But it was first detected in North Carolina this past year. It's probably here before, it just wasn't detected. So in 2001, it was first showed up in Pennsylvania, in Allentown area, and since then it has moved throughout many states in the country, up and down the coast, and just as we get down here in North Carolina last year, we got it down here. Now this has the potential for doing a lot of damage, but really where it's turned up and has been noticed is by moving into houses. It's sort of like the multicolored Asian lady beetle, where it likes to overwinter in protected areas, so they are massing and moving into houses, and that's when they first get detected and people complain about it. So how do you know whether it's just another stink bug or this marmorated stink bug? Check the white banding on the antennae. If it has white bands, dark and white, then that's one indicator. If it has red eyes, that's another indicator. And then even more obvious are these black and white banding there along the edges. So that's what to look for to distinguish it from some of the other ones. It's sort of typical life cycle here. These are some of the life stages of it. Common in stink bugs through the life cycles and the instars. The nymphs look totally different from what they do from the adults. And the scare is here, the damage potential to a lot of, not just moving into the house, but to getting onto a lot of fruit, etc. They've been identified on lots of different fruits and backyards and beans and etc. So it could be a problem there. Okay, any questions that you've got? The resources, the 150 insect notes that we have are all at this website here, insects.ncsu.edu, and you can go to the ornamentals and turf and look up anything to your heart's delight. Some of the photo credit people, and I didn't mention what happened to Jiminy Cricket, but ever since It's a Bug's Life was shown, we're really not sure what happened to Jiminy. Thank you, that's it.
So you got a question about how to get rid of them when they're in the house.
All right. Yes, Mike Wilder has actually answered that. Just the same setup as you do with the multicolored Asian lady beetles. Vacuum them up, sweep them up, or if they're dead, just throw them out. We haven't had too many complaints just yet, but I think it's going to start picking up. So I don't really see a reason to introduce pesticides into your house. That would be my personal suggestion. They're not doing any damage to anything, so just physically pick them up, vacuum them, whatever you want to do, and dispose of them like that. Okay, I'll be around.
Great, thanks very much. And next up, we've got Dave Stephan talking about current issues with insects.
Okay, good morning. Can everybody hear me out there? I hope so. Before I start, I just want to address a couple of comments that Al made earlier about plants being late this year. I've definitely noticed the same thing. I garden with native wildflowers in my yard, and I'd say my wildflowers are at least 2 weeks behind schedule. My trout lilies haven't even started blooming yet, and bloodroot, which should be in full bloom by my next week at this time, they're not even showing above the ground. So yeah, even the native plants are responding late stuff. And question about the mites that he asked. I've not seen any active samples of southern red mite like we did on azalea and hollies come in yet. Seen one sample with a few active spruce spider mite. It was on a juniper. But oddly enough, a month ago today, we got a cherry laurel from Guilford County that had a few active European red mites on it. That's a species we don't see that often, but there they were. Okay. I'm going to start talking first about boxwood pests. And we have 3 species of arthropods that are common on boxwoods here in North Carolina. 3 major pests are the boxwood mite, boxwood leaf miner, and boxwood psyllid. All 3 of these are host-specific to boxwoods. That means they're not going to attack any other plants. I've never even seen them on Pachysandra, which is a relative of boxwood. They all have 1 generation per year. The adults or larvae overwintering. In the case of the boxwood psyllid, adults hibernate somewhere else, come onto the plants in the spring. The boxwood mite, there are probably eggs or possibly adults hidden somewhere around the plants, and they become active soon. And the leaf miners are present in the foliage of the boxwood. The larvae are close to maturity now, and certainly by the end of this month will be pupating. Only a few other insects have I encountered on boxwood. There's an areophyid mite that we've seen a few times. I'm not sure what species it is. I don't know if it's something that's been there all along, we just missed it, or if it's something that is a relatively recent introduction and is emerging. And occasionally I'll see scale insects like wax scales and cottony cushion scale on boxwood, but they're seldom a problem. So I want to talk a little bit about boxwood mite at first, because this is something where you can see the damage year-round, even though the mites themselves have a fairly brief window of activity. So this is a couple of years' growth on a common boxwood, and you can see the lower, older leaves are more heavily damaged, and the younger leaves somewhat less so. A little bit of a close-up here. Jim Baker once described this injury as head scratch injury, which if you see under a scope kind of makes sense. It's like something is scratched or tracked along the surface of the leaf. It's like the mite is walking wrong and stopping every step and probing into the leaf with its mouth parts and producing this little chloride spot. So you'll get kind of a winding track across the leaf. But once the damage is done, it's permanent and it'll be visible year-round. And yet you can see the leaf is not killed. So while it may be somewhat impaired for as far as photosynthesis, the leaf is not dead and will continue to function. Boxwood leaf miner, again, 1 generation a year. The adults will be flying probably sometime in April in the triangle area. Usually about the time you've got say about 1 inch of new growth period on the boxwood is when you start to see the adults emerge. Prior to that, the larvae will have pupated inside the leaf. This is what some of the galls look like from the upper side of the leaf. Here's just another shot. These kind of blisters, you might call them, that they appear on the surface of the leaf. Swellings, irregular in shape. And you flip the leaf over, and this is what they look like on the underside. Now, even without the attacks by the leaf miner, the 2 surfaces of the leaf and the boxwood separate fairly easily, and the adult midge lays her eggs within the leaf, and the larvae grow very slowly. They do take several months to reach maturity, so even though the eggs are laid in April or by the latest in May, the larvae are still fairly small by the time summer is over, and they seem to be mature though by late winter. Here's a few of the galls that have been torn open. And when the larvae are ready to pupate, they will scrape a little window, a little cleared area on the underside of the leaf within that gall area, so that the pupa, the adult is about ready to emerge, can push out from the leaf, and then the adult will emerge from the pupa as it pushes out. I did not have any images of the boxwood psyllid. That's a species that's probably not as much of a pest as the mite or the leaf miner in boxwood, but I do see it, some individual plants around here that are heavily infested. And again, they have the one generation with the mints forming cup leaves on the new growth, and that will be around a little bit later this spring. Pine oyster shell scale is a introduced species that was detected. It was probably introduced about 20, maybe 25 years ago in either Maryland or Pennsylvania in the Northeast somewhere. It was first reported in a publication being in Pennsylvania in 1994. And we first got specimens of this from North Carolina in Dare County just last year. We had another sample come in from Dare County earlier this year, and also a sample from all the way down in Brunswick County. So it has the potential to be all along the coastline wherever Japanese black pine has been planted. It's reported from Japanese black pine, also Japanese red pine, which we don't very often get into the clinic here, but I don't know what its potential is for spreading to our native pine species. And of course, if it gets into loblolly and longleaf and other pines, that could be a very big problem. Some of these samples that have come in, I have seen little exit holes cut in some of the scales where a parasite has emerged, and we do have several other species in scales in the genus Lepidosapes here in North Carolina, including the Mascal scale, which is going to be on conifers like juniper, arborvitae, leyland cypress, and so on. Oyster shell scale, which is found on a variety of hardwood trees. The camellia scale, which can be found on camellia and on hollies. So parasites, parasitoids that attack other species of Lepidosapes may also go for this pine oyster shell scale. This is some of the damage that we believe is being caused by the pine oyster shell scale, where you get these aborted or shortened needles. The needles just don't reach their full length, and some of them may be killed or have brown lesions along the stem. When you get to looking more closely, you find these scales themselves. They prefer to settle either between the needles near the needle base or under the fascicle of the needles near the needle base. And they are present in the adult stage right now, and probably with this warm weather ahead this week, they will probably resume activity and begin to lay eggs. Here's a close-up of this pine oyster shell scale, and you can see I've got this here, a little clumsy when it comes to this stuff. Okay, you can see where it gets you. Okay, sorry. The scale covering that's secreted by the living body of the scale underneath has this kind of elongate, meandering form like some oyster shells. And there are a number of species of scales that have this, but especially species in the genus Lepidosapes. So I think I have one more slide of this one. No, I'm sorry, that was the last slide. I have the pine oyster shell scale. I'll go back to that. But they can be quite dense in here, and the abundance of these things on the samples that we have seen come in suggests that they've probably been here for several years already at least, and that their potential for spreading, I say it may be due to the nursery trade. We don't know for sure, since no scale insects except as adult males have any wing stage. Only the females they stay settled on the plant. So it's possible for wind to blow the crawlers, which are the active stage of this scale, from one tree to another, but to have spread all the way from Maryland and Pennsylvania to North Carolina, coming from a direction that's not going to be prevailing winds from that direction for the most part. So there's a very good chance that humans have aided the spread of the scale into North Carolina and throughout the state. All right. Carrying on with the scale theme, this is some Chinese holly from my own front yard. And I should mention that I like to go green with my yard stuff, and I never spray any pesticides, occasionally a soap solution to control thrips on a few things, but for the most part I never use any pesticides on plants in my yard, and somehow they seem to muddle on through. They'll never make the cover of any gardening magazine, but they live, they bloom, and they carry on their own. So this Chinese holly doesn't look too bad when you look at it from above. However, when you flip it over, there's all kind of sign of scale insect activity and things that are going on down there. So when I talk about some of the scales that we find on azaleas and also on the Sasanko camellias that I've got intermingled with these Chinese hollies. First one is our most common scale insect on the hollies and on camellias is the familiar tea scale. It is very common. Just about any Chinese holly or camellia is liable to get these. There are some scale species that occur both on foliage and bark, but in this case the tea scale is not only on the foliage. They probably have several generations per year, and I have found adults with eggs even during the winter, although they're probably more or less dormant during the winter. And I go back and mention the sexual dimorphism. I'm sorry, I have to go forward for that one. Most scale insects, males and females, look quite different from each other, and that's especially pronounced in these tea scales. So here, the larger brown ones, these are the females. This is not the actual living scale itself, but the shell that the scales secrete over themselves as a protection. So you've got the larger brown females and then the smaller white males here. And this is common for many of our so-called armored scales, where the females are going to be larger and darker in color, and the males are going to be small white. And in some cases, as with the euonymus scale, for example, the males may tend to be clustered more on the foliage, and the females tend to be more clustered on the stem of the plant. I don't know why that is, but something the scales seem to know what's going on. Just another shot of the same leaf. This is a pencil point to give you some idea of the scale of size, pardon me. They're quite small. They're probably females only about a 1/16 of an inch long, and well, what they lack in size, they can certainly make up for in numbers. Another common species on hollies, the one that doesn't usually seem to cause much damage, is the Townsend scale, Abrolaspis townsendii. Excuse me. We have several species in this Abrolaspis here in North Carolina. They all look rather similar to each other in general appearance. We need to mount the body of the living scale on a slide and put it under high power of a compound scope to identify the different species for certain. Some of these, like the Townsend scale, are fairly general feeders, and others are somewhat more host-specific in their choice of foods. Different species of Abrolaspis can be found on the foliage, or on the bark, or on the fruit of their hosts. They probably have 2 to 3 generations per year here in North Carolina. And as I indicated, most Abrolaspis species don't seem to cause too much damage. Although, interestingly enough, last year we had a sample of Townsend scale sent in by John Vining from Polk County on a Rose Bay rhododendron, where they were very heavy on the foliage of the leaf and causing discoloration in the tissue around where the scales were attached. That was a very interesting sample. I don't know whether it was because that particular host plant was unusually sensitive to the scales, or we had some sort of mutant scales attacking the plant. I don't know, but that was kind of an exciting sample for us to get. Not for the grower, but for us. Holly is one of the common host plants for the Townsend scale here in North Carolina. That's probably the host genus that I see it on most frequently. So this is what it looks like. These here are the adult females, these larger specimens here. This one is probably a nymph. This one may be a male here, but I didn't try flipping any of these over to see what was going on. This is one of the tea scales that managed to get itself into the picture here. Peony scale is one that we get a few times each year, and this is kind of an interesting species as far as I'm concerned. I've never seen it on peony, actually, but there are many species of peony that are not commonly grown in the United States. They're indigenous to Asia, and probably some of them are woody plants like our azaleas and camellias, and that may be which species of peonies are attacked over there. So azalea and camellia are the commonly reported host plants for peony scale here in North Carolina. It is one of the largest, if not the largest, and most distinctive of our armored scales, the family Diaspididae. And the Diaspidids, by the way, are also the most numerous in terms of species of the scale families present here in the United States. The peony scale is extremely well camouflaged on the stems and branches, as you'll see in a moment. Probably about 2 generations of that species per year. And it's not usually a serious pest, although one of the mysteries of scales is that oftentimes, for no reason that we can discern, a particular plant will have an unusually heavy infestation of a particular scale. Now, we don't know whether that's due to the cultivar of the plant, the physical location of the plant, something about the health of the plant, what allows these scales to build up into this kind of pretty populations? We just don't know, and that's why we like to have good mysteries around, because it keeps us thinking. So this is what the homeowner typically sees when there's an infestation of peony scale. You see these white scars where the dead scales have flaked off and are gone. These scales died a while back, were parasitized. They were not attacked by this little spider, which has got an inch to get into the picture here, but you see these white scars, and this is what I found on my Sirex when I was collecting samples last week to get images of. And you start looking around, and you see the peony scale in this picture. Say they are extremely well camouflaged. This is the point of an insect pin here, and I'm pointing directly to one of these peony scales, and I think this is probably another one up here. So if you carefully flip that scale over, voila, here is the scale cover, and here is the living body of the scale underneath. Another one here, and I just want to mention this little darkened area at the tip of the abdomen. This is a structure called the pygidium, and it's characteristic of the armored scales. Virtually all armored scales have this structure here, and it's covered with little glands and pores and spines and protuberances and stuff like that, almost like a fingerprint. Very useful in identifying different species of scales. But they're starting to color up, and when they reach full activity in a few weeks, they'll be a deep purple color, and then the eggs they lay will be purple. And this is one of the scales that we can usually identify readily, both from the damage it does, the scar, and also just from the color and size and the host of the scale. Very pretty, say not usually a serious pest in North Carolina, but it's one we can have fun with. Okay, last scale I'm going to cover are the cottony soft scales, the species of the genus Pulvinaria. This is a member of the family Coccidae, the so-called soft scales. Most of our soft scales that are native to North Carolina occurring on plants outdoors have only one generation a year. There are several additional tropical species that can be found on houseplants or in greenhouses here in North Carolina, and they can be active year-round with multiple generations. Cottony scales, like the boxwood leaf miner, they lay their eggs and then the nymphs grow very slowly on the foliage of their host plant. Then come fall, if they're on the foliage of a deciduous plant, they'll move back to the bark to spend the winter. If they're on the foliage of an evergreen plant, they may stay put where they are. And they hunker down for the winter in a fairly small size, and then in spring they will put on this enormous burst of growth after they shed their skins to the adult stage, and I'll have an image of that in a moment. Cottony soft scales are so named because the females produce this very distinctive white ovisac. It's a mass of wax fibers which they secrete from the undersides of their abdomens, and the eggs are embedded within this mass of white fibers. There are several species of Pulvinaria here in North Carolina, and they're rather difficult to identify. I've banged my head against this issue with well-mounted slide specimens, and still often had trouble assigning samples to a particular species or another. But azaleas, camellia, dogwood, hollies, also maples, a number of other hardwoods and shrubs are common hosts for soft scales, cottony soft scales in North Carolina. So here's an image of one of the nymphs. Not a whole lot to look at. This thing was barely a 1/16 of an inch long. These were both on the Chinese holly and on the Sirex chameleon in my yard. Just kind of an oval, pale yellow-green thing, not really much to look at all. Here's another one. This one was on the camellia, the Sirex chameleon in my yard. This is how they look during the winter. They're quite small and only a fraction of the size they'll be a month from now. But once they break dormancy in the spring as the plant begins to grow, and that'll happen probably starting sometime later this month, the nymph will begin to feed and grow, and then it sheds its skin to become the adult. And in just a period of a few weeks, it will grow enormously. I think I've mentioned this in presentations before. It will grow, put on 95, maybe even more % of its growth in its entire life in a period of just a few weeks in the spring. And then when the females begin to lay their eggs, they'll secrete these cottony white fibers. This is the beginnings of the ovisac. When they're done, the ovisac may be several times the length of the original length of the body of the female scale insect, and she will die. The eggs will be protected from most predators and parasites, but where there's a food source, nature will find a way. And there are certain species of lady beetles which are native to the United States, which are specialists. And somehow they manage to chew their way into those masses of wax without getting themselves all gunked up and feed on the eggs. So there are natural enemies that attack some of these critters. And as I say, I never spray the hollies and Sasanqua camellias in my yard. The insects persist, but they never seem to be causing serious problems on the plant. So they just let's get along pretty well by themselves. Okay, shifting gears a little bit here. Vegetable weevil is a serious pest of a number of crops here in North Carolina. It will attack tobacco in particular, young tobacco plants, either in the field or in the greenhouse. It will attack many other vegetables, especially crucifers, and some herbaceous ornamentals will be attacked. We haven't gotten any samples in so far this year, but I'm expecting them to show up any time now. We usually get the larvae reported during the winter months and into the spring. Adults are going to be active year-round, probably take a break during the hot part of the summer. They may go into some sort of diapause during that time, but then resume activity in the fall. As I said, they can be a pest both in the greenhouse and outdoors. And what's interesting about them, among other things, is that unlike the vast majority of species of weevil, the larvae of the vegetable weevil feed externally on the foliage, kind of like a caterpillar, rather than feeding within the plant. The great majority of weevils are either borers in the plant tissue, they live within the fruit, they feed in the roots, in the soil, feeding on roots, or feeding even in the seed of the plant. But only a very few weevils, like the vegetable weevil, and also the alfalfa weevil and clover leaf weevil, which are not related to the vegetable weevil, but they feed on alfalfa and clover and related crops, and they too are external feeders. So here is the adult of the vegetable weevil, and in keeping with most weevil species, you can see it's got a bit of a beak or rostrum here. The mouth parts are actually situated at the tip of the beak, and it's got these elbowed antennae. You've got the large elongated basal segment here, and then it's elbowed just like the elbow of your arm, and then you've got a number of segments beyond that and a club. The adult is about a third of an inch long, maybe a centimeter long. It's usually kind of brownish or grayish in color, and you've got these sort of wedge-shaped, oblique, darker markings on the back half of the body. These are characteristic features of it. If you look at it from the side, it's kind of flattened. It has a flattened appearance when you view it in lateral view. But the adults feed on a variety of the same plants that the larvae are feeding on. These are some larvae that are in alcohol, so they're not going to show up quite as clear as if they were alive. They've been preserved, but it shows the typical appearance of weevil larvae, the characteristic C shape, as we say, the legless appearance of them. These are about a third of an inch long at maturity. Here's a little more of a close-up of one of those larvae, again emphasizing the C shape. These darker spots along the body are at regular intervals, each one of them situated on a single segment of the body, and these are the spiracles, the little openings in the body through which the weevil breathes. Close-up, I'm afraid, is not a very good one, but one of the distinctive features of the weevil, the vegetable weevil larva, is you've got these darker streaks, kind of mottled darker streaks running lengthwise on a lighter brown head capsule. That's a characteristic that helps to identify the vegetable weevil. You can also see here the single eye, the ocellus. Most weevil larvae, well, all weevil larvae have only one or two ocelli, which can probably detect a little more than light and dark. They don't see images very well. And also the very small antenna located right next to the base of the mandible, which is here. And they use the antenna as well as sensors on some of the mouth parts to determine what the food is that they're feeding on. Okay, the last thing I'm going to talk about here, I have a couple of other things, but we're running short on time, are the tent caterpillars. And we have two species of tent caterpillar here in North Carolina, the eastern tent caterpillar, the Malacosoma americanum, and the forest tent caterpillar, Malacosoma distria. They have one generation per year, overwintering as eggs on the stems of the plants. The eggs will be hatching very shortly, sometime this month, and then the larvae will feed, and after about 2 months of feeding, they'll be fully mature. They will spin their cocoons, and they spend a couple of weeks in the cocoon, and then the adult moth will emerge sometime in May or June, fly around, mate, lay their eggs, the moths will die, and then the eggs will spend the rest of the season on the host plant. So the eastern tent caterpillar prefers various kinds of rosaceous trees and shrubs, especially apple, cherry, peach, and plum. But they do have definite preferences for certain species within their groups or certain cultivars within. And there are some that they really love and others they just don't seem to mess with at all. The forest tent caterpillars prefers a variety of hardwoods, oaks, sweet gum, tupelo. Farther north, they may feed on the true poplar, not the tulip poplar or yellow poplar we have here in the southeast. Out in the western states, there are additional species of tent caterpillars. So this is the egg mass of the eastern tent caterpillar. Egg mass is a shiny blackish or dark brown structure. It looks kind of like it's been varnished or polished. It's like a sleeve or a collar, and it encircles the stem of the host plant. And it will spend upwards of 9 months sitting on that plant from late spring or early summer all the way through the next winter to late winter, early spring before they hatch. There's another image of the same species. I'd say this will extend for about an inch, possibly as much as 3/4 of an inch along the stem. Yeah, they're fairly easy to spot on narrow stem plants during the winter when everything is bare. Black cherry is one of the favorite hosts of the eastern tent caterpillar in North Carolina. It has very slender stems, so you can look for it easily on them. Fat-stemmed hosts like apple, it's a little harder to spot them on that host plant. You've all seen, I'm sure, the web of the eastern tent caterpillar. This is a cherry, possibly a black cherry by the look of the blossoms up here. And you can see good-sized larvae partially hidden within the web. But they move down from the twigs where the egg mass was, and they settle in the forks of larger branches or along the trunk of the tree and begin to spin this web. They may spin tiny webs farther out on the twigs when they're quite young, but eventually they'll work their way down to larger branches or limbs. As larvae get mature, the web will start to fall apart. It fills up with their droppings or frass. The characteristic single white stripe down the length of the caterpillar, which can reach up to about 2 inches long. This is a good way to identify them. They tend to be somewhat hairy, but not as hairy as one of the woolly bear caterpillars. And inside the web, they're pretty well protected from most things, and most birds don't like to eat hairy caterpillars. But I've read that cuckoos will eat hairy caterpillars. Don't know why cuckoos should be so special like that, but they do. This is the adult moth, the eastern tent caterpillar. Not a great image, but gives you an idea of what it looks like. And so these will be active sometime in May or June is when the adults will often show up in lights at fairly good numbers. Forest tent caterpillar. This is an old egg mass here that's already hatched out. Here's a young egg mass. And this is on a sugar maple, but they say they can be found on a number of other host plants. Very similar general appearance to the egg mass of the eastern tent caterpillar. The larvae don't spin a tent like the eastern tent caterpillar does, but instead they tend to hide during the day on the trunk of a tree. Now this particular mass of caterpillars is rather highly visible because of the light bark of the tree, but if they were on a dark bark tree with a lot of furrows in the trunk, like some of the oaks, for example, or a sweet gum, they would be very well camouflaged because they would just sit quietly there and they could easily be overlooked unless you were searching for them. Instead of having a single white stripe down the back, they got the stripe broken into a row of pale blue dots. So that's another way you can tell the two species apart. And at that point, I'm going to just, I'm just going to flip through the rest of these slides because we're short on time. And I'm going to let Mike take over again, and we're going to be giving a little video about this project. If there are any questions, we will try to answer them at the end.
All right. Both Dave and I are interested in promoting knowledge about bees. All right. This is part of an effort that both Dave and I are interested in doing to bring a little more attention to weeds in this program. Neither one of us is a weed scientist, but we had the advantage in this case of that wonderful video from the Seacoast program explaining the most salient details. If there's any interested in knowing more about beech vitex, there's an excellent website at www.beechvitex.org with other links to a brochure and identification information and so on. So let's talk about diseases for a little bit. And a lot of people were commenting about the weather. And so I'm going to take a quick poll here. If you notice on your screen, there is a spot that will allow you to write here. I think some people were pushing on or writing instead of clicking here, but right there's a check and an X where you can click yes or no as to whether spring has arrived in your location. If people are doing that, I just would make the comment the silver lining to the cool weather we've had, according to Turner Sutton here, is that hopefully our fruit trees will be a little slower in, well, because they're coming out slower to flower, they may avoid some of those frosts that often knock back the flower and damage the fruit. All right, so a little more than half say that spring has arrived in their area, and some people are still waiting for it. Another challenge in doing the sessions that we're doing this year is that we've got to project for a period of 2 months, since we won't be talking now until May. I'm going to try and say some things that will help you identify disease problems between now and the next time we meet. First of all, though, I want to make an important point or give you some tips and reminders about sampling when you're going to be sending samples into the Plant Disease and Insect Clinic. This was an actual sample received this year. I'm not putting it on to make anybody feel bad, but do want to remind everyone that we need a complete sample to be able to do a complete diagnosis. In addition, this sample came in misidentified. It was identified as Yopon, and it turned out to be a kind of oak. The first reminder is that dead plants tell no tales, and actually healthy ones don't either. So if the plant is completely dead, we're probably not going to be able to figure out what the original cause of the problem was. Another reminder to look for transition zones. In the case of this rhododendron, what you'd want to do is you'd want to follow that dead branch back to find out if it's coming from a canker or other kind of transition zone between healthy and diseased tissue. This canker here is very obvious. Here's a canker on an oak branch. It's much more subtle, just the sort of a flattened area on the bark, a little bit of a crack here. Very important reminder, most of the time, or much of the time I should say, problems that we see on the foliage of the plants are really reflecting something that's going on in the soil. In this particular case, from an experimental plot with lesion nematodes making the difference between the two plants on the left and on the right. Check the base of the plant. In this case, we have a tree, and looking at the base, you might discover both the the matted mycelium, indicating the presence of, in this case, armillaria root rot, and also these shoestring-like rhizomorphs, which are another sign of the fungus. In many cases, you won't be able to give us any sample from the base of the plant because you don't want to do damage to a tree or a shrub that may still have a chance of surviving and looking good. But if the tree or the shrub is going to come out anyway, then please do include at least some chips, or better yet, the whole base of the plant for better identification. Keep the roots and soil together. A good double handful of the feeder roots, larger ones if you can get them, in about a quart of soil should be sufficient. Wrap those in one bag, put the stems and leaves in another. Do not add water. Don't forget the completed sample submission form. And while I'm mentioning that, just point out that when you're entering these online, the percent affected field is now required. You can't submit unless you've filled something there. And what we mean by percent affected is as a population of plants. So we're not saying, oh, is 100% of that tree affected, but rather, is it 10 trees out of 100 in the row, etc. Digital images are very helpful. They help us get a sense of the setting where the problem is occurring, something that we can't get from the sample itself. And in some cases, we can even do a diagnosis based on a picture, as in the case of black knot here, or exobasidian leaf fall on chameleon rhododendron. In other cases, we can make a pretty good guess based on a picture. In this case, it's a Cercospora-like fungus causing leaf spot on ligustrum. But very often, we'll have to ask for a follow-up sample if one was not provided initially. I know there's going to be a lot of temptation to try and rely more on digital images for a reason that I'm going to mention in the announcements at the end. But please do be aware that we often need that physical sample. You can upload digital images right from the sample entry page. But as the database stands now, once you've submitted the sample, you won't be able to attach images afterward. We here in the clinic can do so. And the importance of sturdy packaging. Sometimes things get a little roughed up in the mail. And these classic photos, I think, came from Tom Cresswell here. Nicely labeled, please do not crush. But inside, that's exactly what happened. I want to quickly run through a few diseases then in the 15 minutes that are remaining and tell a tale of 2 dogwood diseases. So again, using your selections here, if Lydia, we could get the letters, thank you. What disease do we have here on the dogwood in this photograph? Detritus blight, dogwood anthracnose, septoria leaf spot, or spot anthracnose? Right? A lot of people stumped here, but the correct answer is in fact spot anthracnose. D. Let's take a look at its characteristics. Usually we see the symptoms on the bracts like in the previous photograph, but it can also cause lesions on the leaves that can look like septoria leaf spot. So there could be a little confusion there. Typically, though, we see small reddish spots on the bracts. Again, can be on the leaves. They can be quite numerous and deform the bracts. And this we saw last year with the nice wet spring weather and some places where it looked like the dogwoods got hit by a late frost, but I think it was actually just a severe case of the spot anthracnose. The pathogen is a fungus by the name of Elsinoe corni. It spends the winter on the twigs or even fruit, and in the spring becomes active and infects the expanding bracts. Now, often people are going to wonder whether or not fungicides should be used here. Now, there is a possibility that protective fungicides would have a beneficial effect, but I personally wouldn't recommend them, partly because of the difficulty in treating large trees, but also because by the time you see things like this, you're probably too late. Fungicide applications would have to have been started back around bud swell and then continued a couple times after that. So I would question both the necessity and the efficacy of treating for this disease once you've seen it in the landscape. Very important to point out that spot anthracnose is common but not a serious disease. And that's where we get into our tale of 2 diseases. Because the unfortunately named dogwood anthracnose is very different. This is caused by the fungus Discula destructiva. It can begin as a leaf spot or blotch, but here's the difference. It can move into the twigs of the trunk and can even kill the tree. This tends to be worse in forested areas than in landscaped areas on dogwood. And within North Carolina, we only observe it in the mountains, and it's worse above 1,800 feet in elevation. So if you're outside the mountains here and you see the symptoms that we saw, you can be pretty confident that you're dealing with spot anthracnose and not dogwood anthracnose, which it's interesting. I look back at the clinic records. In the last couple of years, we haven't had any dogwood anthracnose identifications or diagnoses. Just want to make a few comments about rose diseases. Of course, the question is, why are we talking about rose diseases in March? Well, the reason is because this is the time when you've got to get ahead of them by sanitation, which include two things. One, of course, pruning, and you will know in your respective counties better than I when it's the right time to prune. The advice hasn't changed. It's just when they're starting to break dormancy. That'll be the time to get rid of diseased canes that are the reservoirs for some of these canker pathogens. We also want to make sure that we remove diseased fallen leaves that are harboring fungi, or else cover them up with another layer of mulch so they don't splash up onto the foliage. Let's start out with this disease, though. Again, the poll here, is this picturing botrytis blight, common canker, crown gall, or root knot nematode? I'm going to move that. No? Not bad. The majority have it. This is, in fact, crown gall. And this is one of the diseases that we diagnose based on symptoms here in the clinic. We don't do isolations for it, but observing what the gall looks like outside and in, we make the presumptive diagnosis for crown gall. This one is caused actually by a bacterium called Agrobacterium tumefaciens. You may have seen other names for it, but this is, I think, the one that people are accustomed to. It's a soil-borne bacterium, so once it's in the soil, you're going to have problems on that site afterward. It does need wounds to infect. It causes galls, of course, and then a general decline in the plants. It's interesting that there are many hosts of this bacterium, including rose, but also Euonymus fortunii, willow. We've seen it a couple times on weeping willow here in the clinic in the last 2 years, and it can actually go higher on the stem instead of just at the soil line or roots where we usually think. And also pecan and grape have been diagnosed with it here in the clinic in recent years. For managing this disease, you want to avoid areas that have had the problem in the past. Minimize cultivation, so you're minimizing injuries where the bacterium would invade. Of course, inspect your bare root plants when you get them in to make sure they don't have crown gall in the first place. Sanitation of any kind of knives or shears or equipment they're using in the propagation is important. And in some cases, I don't know if this is available actually for homeowners, but the use of a biocontrol bacterium can help prevent and protect root systems if it's used at planting time. All right, we have two canker diseases here. One of these represents common canker, and one of them represents botrytis canker. So let's see if we can poll people and determine which one is which. All right, you folks are hard to fool except for Bambara there. It goes C. But in fact, the one on the left, B, is picturing botrytis canker. And how can we know that for sure? Well, in this case, it's because of the presence of the sign of the fungus itself, which are these fuzzy black, we call them conidiophores, with their whitish to grayish conidia. Even if that were not present, though, one hint is that this tends to be a lighter color, at least in my experience, than the color of common canker. But we do see both, and the treatment in both cases is going to be based on pruning. mention the ecology briefly of canker diseases in general. They'll have overwintered on infected branches and twigs, or even on leaves that can remain on the plants. And most of them are spread by water splash of spores, although in the case of botrytis, wind spread is going to be the method of greatest importance. And on tools, we also need to be thinking about the fact that we can be moving canker diseases. I talked about this last year in one of our sessions. So as far as management, again, pruning to remove the overwintering fungus. Prune correctly, use sharp tools, go down to a couple of nodes below where the damage is apparently ended, and don't damage the node that you're pruning on. Prune at the right time, etc. Avoiding stress to the plants is an important way of keeping them from succumbing to canker diseases. So plant plants that are appropriate to the site, use the right techniques at transplanting time, keep your water and fertilization optimized, avoid wounding, and if possible, if you have the possibility to do this, reduce the damage from freezes. Finally, avoid overhead irrigation. Again, that promotes the spread of these and their growth. This disease should be common knowledge to everyone, I think. Black spot, caused by a fungus, it goes by two different names because it's got a sexual and asexual stage, Diplocarpon rosy and Marcinina rosy. Again, here what we want to do is make sure that those fallen leaves are removed, because apart from the black spots with the feathered margins and the yellow halos, leaf drop is a very important symptom of this. There are some resistant cultivars out there. You've probably all heard about the knockout roses. That doesn't mean they're resistant to all leaf diseases, though. We've seen them hit with cylindrocladium leaf spot and hit pretty heavily with downy mildew. Reducing leaf wetness is a key in reducing this disease. It is capable of many cycles in the year, or so the entomologists will understand. It has multiple generations a year. And we, in this case, do probably need fungicide applications to be able to keep it under control. If you want a few more details on that, there's the site to the information note on rose disease that we have. Let me just make a quick poll here. If you would use your text tool and type into the box, see if we can come up with 3 ways to reduce leaf wetness, which is a key to reducing some of these fungal and bacterial diseases. Type onto the screen itself by using the little tool right up here. See, some people are typing into that area as well. Okay, full sunshine, drip irrigation rather than overhead, spacing, very good. That's the one I was looking for. Plant spacing, sometimes we don't always think about that, or proper pruning to promote air movement and therefore rapid drying of the plants. Watering early in the day so the plants have a chance to dry off. Everybody's on the ball. Oh, umbrellas. I said that. Yeah. No, it was Beaufort County. All right, moving right along. It used to be, in the good old days, that the rose diseases we had to worry about were those that were moved around by the propagation process and the famous rose mosaic, which is actually caused by one or more or combination of viruses. But now the thing that people are worried about is rose rosette. And I just want to say a few words about that. There is no laboratory test for diagnosing rose rosette. We have to go just based on symptoms and circumstances. And one of the best symptoms, but isn't necessarily always going to be there, is this hyperthorniness, the production of many, many thorns on the stem, more than is normal, and they may be soft and pliable. Another diagnostic symptom is the super flexibility of the stems. I've read that you could bend them all the way back and not have them snap. I don't think I've actually experienced that particular symptom myself. or on roses that I've examined. And here was one with a hyperthorniness where you would say that this was likely to be rose rosette. Here's a case where I kind of felt it was 50% or better that it was rose rosette. We've got the reddening of the new foliage, which is one of the things that often occurs, and that reddening doesn't go away when the leaves expand as they normally would on some of these that have red leaves to start with anyway. And also increased sensitivity to cold, so you see some of the cold damage on the tips of these stems. And here's a case where we felt it was not rose rosette. It didn't have the typical symptoms, and there had been a glyphosate application in the area not long before this, so we felt that it was probably a glyphosate damage rather than rose rosette. And as you know, there is no cure for this. Infected plants have to be removed, and it is spread by a microscopic, invisible, but they say real, Areophid mite that will move it from rose to rose. The entomologists can comment on how to control those mites and whether or not that's effective in controlling disease. That's out of my particular area. For more information on rose rosette, I would actually refer you to our neighbors to the north at the Virginia Cooperative Extension Service. They have a publication that explains basically what I have just mentioned and even more details that I think people will find very helpful. Well, I see we're out of time, so just a couple of quick announcements from the Plant Disease and Insect Clinic. One of them is that we have someone who's updating our plant disease information notes now, so hopefully those will be coming online fairly soon with updated and more attractive information. The other announcement, not quite so pleasing, and is that in a few weeks, please keep an eye out for an announcement about the fee increase that will be happening here at the clinic. The last details are under negotiation. One final detail that has to be worked out before that memo can be circulated, but I felt it would be unfair to not mention anything we felt it would be unfair not to mention this during this session because people will want to be aware that it is coming up. And with that, I thank you for your attention. There's less than a minute for questions if anyone would like to pose one. All right, so hope to see you then in May with our next session of PPP, and turn it back to Lucy.
Great, thanks, Mike. So here's some things that are coming up that you guys may be interested in. Actually, tonight at Meredith College here in Raleigh is a screening of Fresh, the movie. And the panel includes Joel Salatin, who is one of the stars of that movie, and also Food Inc. I think it starts at 7 tonight at Meredith, and there's the website if you're interested in getting more details. We have the plant sale coming up at J.C. Ralston Arboretum. Master Gardener Conference is going to be April 25th through the 28th in New Bern, and here's the website for the Master Gardener Association, and you can get a registration form and more information there. May is the J.C. Ralston Arboretum Garden Gala, and we have Inside the Beltline Tour de Coupe is coming up May 15th. Are there other upcoming events or dates that you guys want to share with each other? Okay. Any other questions or any other information you want to share with the group before we close? All right, well, we have moved our schedule to every other month, the second Tuesday of the month. So we'll see you the second Tuesday of May. And happy gardening till then. Bye-bye.